Fake balls are a real business, and Gregg Miller has made a fortune in the weirdest place ever.
What I'm doing is developing testicular implants for pets.
Well, yeah, my doctor had suggested that maybe he should get Neuticles.
A testicular implant.
This is a boob job for a dog.
Oh my God.
Today, we're going into Neuticles. Let me show you a window into my madness. This is one of the stranger books I could have possibly hoped to read in my life. Going Nuts. The Story Had to Be Told by Gregg A. Miller. Neuticles are testicle prosthesis that you put in a dog. Yeah, they're fake dog nuts. It's simple as that. We're wearing the swag, the full fit, the tote, the shirt, the hat. If the hat gets too hot, we got the visor ready to take over for the hat. And just for something to hold on to so that we can make sure that at no point in time am I, really unmoored from the idea of what a Neuticle is. We do have the plastic key rings. Tom, put it in your mouth. No. I had to put it down so quickly. They have patent pending written on them, and they say Neuticles on the side. So I think those are just unused dog balls. Today's stream will feature content warnings for dementia and parental death. I've done a lot of research here. I will now read the back of Going Nuts. Every person and every family across the world goes through the same life cycle. They are born, raised, live, and die. Every person and every family has their own story to tell. Going Nuts is one of those more unique stories. This true account tells a 6-year saga of dedication to family, of invention, and a determination to succeed and survive despite overwhelming odds. As you begin, and as the story unfolds, you will discover why this story had to be told. Going Nuts is dedicated to all those who are included in this book. The good, the bad, and even the evil. The first page of the book is the blurb again, almost verbatim. If it has not sunk into you yet that this is a self-published book, I don't know what to tell you. This is a vanity job, gang. Gregg Miller sat down, wrote this, and got it published. Before we get into the book, this is going to... does it still smell like 50 cigars? It fucking reeks, yes. And I'll just say it now. Gregg Miller is a avid cigar smoker. His cigar collection numbers in like tens of thousands of dollars. When we received the shipment of stuff from that was packed by him, when I opened the box up, it smelt like I had smoked 50 cigars in the house, to the extent where Demi, who knows I don't smoke, knows I would never smoke, was like, has Tom just smoked a full pack of cigarettes? The book starts with the sentence, "It was an unseasonably hot and humid Missouri June evening in 1993. But the story of Gregg Miller starts well before that. Here is what I know about him before the book begins. Gregg Miller started off in newspapers, but before then, he was 18 years old, running for city council. He ran for the Independence, Missouri 3rd District Council seat, and he came in third by a wide margin. Next up, he pops up in the papers in 1973, 25th of October, taking out 2 identical ads for bumper stickers saying Spyro had it coming, Nixon next. He takes out 2 identical ads through, I assume, an error of his own. One of them with the formatting that he clearly wanted, and the other one just completely all put together. In 1976, we see recent college graduate Gregg A. Miller posting a work wanted ad. He's looking for work in journalism. At this point, he has his degree in public relations. In the Tipton Times, in 11 November 1976, you can see that his CB handle is Gabby Hayes, a reference to an actor at the time. And he gets his job at the Tipton Times, writing such features as, "A dad got on a skateboard and broke his leg. An Italian youth has come to town." And a terrifying interview with a sheriff, where the sheriff says, "I will apply God's law." This is another page that he pops up in. This is an analysis of an election. One of the people running for election is John Wirtz, a candidate for marshal. He said if elected, there won't be secret or part-time police. There will be only the full-time officers. This is interesting to me because Gregg Miller wrote this. Also, Gregg Miller is the person who found out that John Wirtz was growing a marijuana plant and reported it to the cops. He took some of the leaves and gave them to the Missouri State Highway Patrol for identification in 8th of September 1977. Worths, prior to the confiscation, said that the plant was being cultivated for the purpose of identification and to train a dog to detect the substance. Late Wednesday morning, Worths advised Miller to either apologize by noon that day for discovering the plant or to be out of town by midnight. Worths further advised that Tipton police would offer no protection should anything happen. That maybe gives you a bit of an idea as to what Missouri is like. But he stood his ground. He didn't get run out of town. He stuck around and instead dobbed this guy into the cops. The Tipton Times still exists to this day. The Tipton Times has some of the most beautiful ads I've ever seen in my fucking life. Look at this. Look at the fonts, the design, the genuine winning smile on the cowboy-hatted man. Also, this is from the Septemberfest issue, which does give you a feeling that Tipton kind of exists outside of time. Buy dirt, says Trisha Scheidt. We get a resurface from Gregg A. Miller in 1980. This is when he was going through his period of unemployment. A highly motivated editor, age 27 at this point, seeks permanent post on solid 6-day paper. Now that doesn't catch. In 1983, he starts his own advertising business. This is recorded in the Kansas City Star on the 1st of March, 1983. We skip forward to Missouri, 1993. The book begins here. The book starts with Gregg arriving at his parents' house, opening the door of his car, having his dog bound out of the car. He goes inside his parents' house, leaving his dog unsupervised on an open property, and the dog immediately gets hit by a car and killed. Gregg does not seem to internalize this as a fault of his. He only views this as a strange tragedy. Chapter 1. Here is where we start. Chapter 2. The dog is dead here. He runs in, has this witnessed by his family. Let's go through the family because they are going to be the backbone of the book. Gregg Miller says that this is a story that had to be told. It's more like it is a story that Gregg Miller had to tell to settle the many, many grudges and resentments and feuds that he has cultivated over the years. His parents, dad and, to use the Americanism, Mom. Leo Bud Miller is his dad, a retired steel worker of 40 years who joined the Navy when World War II started. He is described as a true blue conservative redneck. His mom, Marion, is a nervous woman struggling with a heart condition since she turned 50, and she is obsessed with weight. Gavin is his little brother. He's 25 in 1993. Gavin is his best friend, in his words, and Gregg identifies himself as Gavin's undeclared mentor. Gavin has worked for Gregg assembling sweet tubes, which we'll get to, since he was 11 years old. Gavin is married to Debby, despite objections from the family. Debby is Gavin's wife, has a 4-year-old son named Mark from a previous marriage, also assembles sweet tubes part-time with Gavin. What's wrong with Debby? It is so unclear. Gavin and Debby. Mom, Dad, and I help them financially whenever possible. A decision which cost thousands of dollars, but was worth it because they were family. Now, the other child in the family is DeWitt. DeWitt is in his 40s. He's the oldest child. He's only visited their parents twice in 10 years. Gregg hasn't spoken to him in years. In his youth, he was a self-declared hellraiser. He has caused mom and dad unspeakable grief with his alcoholism, drug abuse, and all the horrific related activities which shamed and disgraced our small family. Before the next slide comes up, I don't want you all putting all your eggs in the DeWitt rocks basket. Oh, he killed a dog? No. But when he was in his 30s, he got a 16-year-old girl named Linda pregnant and asked his parents for money to pay a bill. Then he used the money to get Linda, and quoting Gregg, an abortion, forbidden by our Catholic faith. In his 40s, though, he has become an attorney and appeared to have completely changed his life. Now, the dog is dead. Gregg's beloved dog has been hit by a car and killed. He gets a new dog named Buck from a family with a litter of puppies. When he picks up Dog, the kids in the family cry and beg him not to take their puppy in a frankly unnerving scene that I would have omitted and just said, I got a dog out of nowhere. Buck, as he grows, matures into himself and goes through dog puberty. At some point, he runs away from home. He is missing for 4 days, and he's found near a dog in heat. Now, we will return to that just in a second because I have remembered that I didn't actually explain what Gavin and Debby were working on. Sweet Tubes. Sweet Tubes is Gregg's business. Sweet Tubes is what takes Gregg to the next level after a long period of absolute unemployment. Is it just lollies in a tube? Yes. In 1981, I had invented Sweet Tube, quoting here from page 17. A plastic 1-inch diameter tube 3 feet long with layers of color-coordinated candy inside. Candy in a tube. A world's first. Through the years, over $6 million worth of Sweet Tubes have been sold to hundreds of accounts. From Hickory Farms to Walmart to Disney World and Disneyland. And anyone who is reacting to that with 3 feet is a lot of candy is right. Sweet Tubes are featured here in the Kansas City Star on the June of 8th, 1995. Gregg Miller raises his hands in firm protest. Don't call me the Candy Man. Here he's getting his sister, Kim, to help him assemble the Sweet Tubes. Here is Gregg pictured with his invention, the Sweet Tube. His company is called Miller Land Brands. The Sweet Tube trademark is cancelled if we want to steal it. I believe that Sweet Tube is now just something that people can make and do and whatever. This is sufficient to get Gregg 10 acres of land, along with his PR agency and his advertising agency. We get to Neuticles. When Buck runs away, Gregg is absolutely destroyed. And he finally finds him after 4 days of searching. He finds him near a dog in heat because Buck has run off to fuck. He takes Buck to his vet, Doc Holder, to be neutered, finally. But he's very, very neuter reticent. He doesn't want to have it happen. This strikes me as I got a line on 10,000 long plastic tubes and started a business around that. The impetus for this was he got sent something in the mail that came in a tube, and he thought to himself, tubes. I can do something with that. He basically saw the hard tubes that people use to send things in the mail. No, he didn't buy. He convinced the people around who made the tubes to send him them as free samples, convinced the people who make candy to send him candy for free samples, assembled them, and then went door to door selling these. Neuticles. He does have a quote here. The feeling of high anxiety kept returning, reminding me Buck would never be able to father puppies. And this is an interesting quote. Would become female in appearance. It all seems so unnatural. He asks the vet if there is a way that he can get Buck an implant to leave him a ball sack hanging fresh and full. The vet looks him in the eye and says, I have no idea. I've been a vet for 25 years and that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. I don't like that. Me neither. It is so insane. Buck wakes up after his anesthetic and started to clean himself, a task which he had performed since he was a puppy. He looked down at his private area to begin the process, quoting here. It was disgusting, mainly because of the noises he made during it. Now, I'm going to cut here to a video interview from CNBC.
Buck did get neutered that fateful day. I brought him home. He went to clean himself. He loved to do that. Mm-hmm. This slurping noise that was so freaking obnoxious.
That is the sound that Gregg is missing. Quoting from the book here, he didn't clean himself, only had that look of bewilderment. When he gets Buck's stitches removed, Gregg asks about the testicular implants again. And this time, Doc Holder says there might be something in the idea. He asks Gregg for one simple thing, a lump of clay. Although in the CNBC article, he says it's a lump of wax. When Gregg brings Doc Holder the lump of clay, Doc Holder's hands expertly fashion it into the shape of a dog testicle. Quoting from the book here, if anyone knew the shape of a dog testicle, it was Doc Holder. In his 45 years of practice, he had neutered over 250,000 pets, 500,000 testicles. It looks like a jelly bean, I said. That's a canine testicle, he said, giving it a final look and gently setting it into a specially made container for transport. Introducing Neuticles to the world was months away. Keeping it a secret was important. Neuticles was still under development, and the idea could easily be stolen by a big company that had the funds to develop it at warp speed, beating me to the patent rights and certain success that lay ahead. He develops Neuticles in secret. He takes the mold that Doc Holder crafts in his hands very carefully to a place that turns that into a mold. Over a 50-year career, someone would have to neuter 13 pets every single day to hit 250,000. Bogenbroom, thank you for doing the maths there. That is very helpful. It is funded by Gregg Miller and people he knows around Independence, Missouri, including the insanely well-named brother-sister duo of Jill and Joe Smear. It is an advertising hit. Gregg is doing radio interviews from 5 a.m. on the day of December 20th, 1995. As he drives to the vet, he's switching between the 2 radio channels that are hyping up the procedure with custom-made jingles. A 7-month-old Rottweiler named Max gets the first ever commercial Neuticles implant, and reporters crowd around as Dr. Holder explains every step of the procedure, while Gregg takes reporters' calls from the clinic's phone at the reception. The AP picks up the story, it's distributed worldwide, and then on Christmas Eve, 4 days later, he turns on the radio and hears his own voice being used as a promo on the Randy Miller morning show promoting Neuticles. I quote from the book here. "I was amazed and thrilled. My dream of fame and fortune was almost there. I was getting famous, and it was the most incredible feeling I'd ever had." Gavin and Debby do all of Gregg's Christmas shopping because he is too busy to do it himself with the product launch. At this point, Gregg hits us with the facts. Creating new products is his calling in life. January finds Gregg basking in the wave of public attention that has come to the Neuticles. Unfortunately, the sales have not matched the amount of attention that he's got. He uses advertising tactics to pick up the disappointing Neuticle sales. Sales in January total $109. Not what you want when you've sunk your life savings and the savings of several of the people who live in your hometown who you've known your whole life into this. He has a solution, though, for the PR, gets it on the radio and gives away a neutering with Neuticles in every single state. We are entering the period that, according to Gregg, was termed Neuticle Mania by the press. That period is happening in 1996. In 1996, Gregg has an interview with Man-Cow Mueller. "Well, Gregg, exactly why did you come out with these dog balls?" he asked in a low tone. "We prefer to call them Neuticles," I replied. Yeah, he replied. "But why?" "Well," I said, "I want other pet owners to avoid the trauma Buck and I faced when I had to have him neutered." "But why?" he asked. "It really all boils down to people's love of their pets. They are like a member of the family," I said, hoping to appeal to his moral fiber, which immediately, from what little I know of Man-Cow, you're fucked. The guy has a Wikipedia controversy section a mile long. "So you love your dog?" he asked. "Well, yes," I said. "Millions of pet owners do." "Do you have sex with your dog, Gregg?" he asked. "Do you? Do you?" he repeated. "It sounds to me like you need a brain implant," I snapped. Man-Cow appeared to be angered deeply. Yeah, that would have absolutely crushed him. I heard someone in the background say, "Keep it rolling. Keep it rolling." "So you love your dog?" At that point, I didn't care what he thought or what his listeners thought, as I was insulted and tired. Hey, I don't have to put up with this crap, and I slammed down the phone as hard as I could. The producers called 4 times, attempting to get me back on, but I refused. The interview was aired later that year as one of the top 10 people he angered on the air. An odd achievement at best. Rush Limbaugh is a supporter of Neuticles. He features Neuticles on his show. He approaches the Chinese government about putting Neuticles in a recently neutered giant panda called Ming. The Chinese government turns him down. Rush Limbaugh holds up Neuticles on the TV on his show and says, "Only in America." Now at this point, we pivot from the world of Neuticles to the world of family. Gavin and Debby. Gavin, who Gregg is the, in his words, undeclared mentor of. Gavin and Debby are making over $1,000 monthly assembling sweet tubes for Disney orders. But in January 1996, Gavin starts picking fights with Gregg. He starts being aggressive towards Gregg. Gregg has them employed putting sweets into tubes. They do this for every single order. Gregg, at this point, lists the things he's given Gavin and Debby. I had given Gavin and Debby $5,000 a year earlier for their wedding present, 2 months rent in Kansas City, a bookcase, a phone, a table and chairs, divan, a washer and dryer, and hundreds of dollars in addition. One day, Gavin calls to say he's coming over, and when he turns up with a 6-pack and his stepson, he comes over, he wipes his muddy boots on Gregg's carpet runner. "Gosh, Gavin, why didn't you take your shoes off before coming inside? Look at the mess. You ruined the carpet," Gregg says. "Well, if you don't want me over here, just say so and I'll go." Gregg snaps back. "Well, if you're going to act like this, that may not be a bad idea." Gavin storms out of the room at this. It seems like maybe there's some stuff that's not being said that potentially Gregg isn't picking up on. He doesn't strike me as the most emotionally intelligent man alive. Gavin leaves, furious, and he drives home. There he enters his house. He walks into the sweet tube workshop that he, Debby, and the neighbors work at, assembling the 3-foot-long treats, and he throws $9,000 worth of assembled and unassembled sweet tubes into the street and then runs them over with his car. According to Gregg, neighborhood children see the street overflowing with candy and charge in, eating it straight out of the gutters. In the wake of this, sweet tube orders inexplicably dry up. Months later, Gregg finds out that his mother overheard Debby bragging that she called Disney and ruined Sweet Tube's 14-year business with them. It was never discovered what Debby had told Disney, but I was out of the Sweet Tube business and now had no income. I do not believe this on multiple levels. Gavin and Debby, after this, spend weeks making harassing calls to Gregg. Gavin says he will kill Gregg's dog and that he's going to get Gregg. Gavin starts coming to Gregg's house at night and leaving beer cans where he knows they're going to be found, so Gregg knows he's being watched. And one night, Gavin comes over and leaves a perfectly made hangman's noose draped across Gregg's front gate. At this point, the book immediately pivots as Gregg is to be flown to New York to do the daytime talk show, The Pat Bullard Show. Pat Bullard was a comedian and TV host. After spending 2 pages on the weeks of harassment and death threats from his little brother and his sister-in-law, Gregg spends full 5 pages on his 8 minutes on The Pat Bullard Show. He writes about getting into the hotel, how nice it is there. He writes about the filet mignon that he picks up there. He writes out every single line. He writes out the physical bit where he produces Neuticles from his pocket on the show. When Pat Bullard says he doesn't want to touch them, he writes out that he leans forward and rubs them on his arm. He writes it out in such detail that it makes me feel like he has to have recorded this and now be watching it back as he writes this section out. Gregg ends his trip to New York with a heartbreakingly honest paragraph. I left Manhattan that sunny afternoon with a sense of knowing that great things had just happened. I loved being center stage, the excitement of show business, and above all, being seen by and influencing millions of people. That's the thing he loves above all. I was addicted to the limelight and prayed it would never end because it made me feel euphoric, and I loved it. This is a moment that is bookended by family tragedy on either side because he immediately after receiving the noose from his little brother goes on this show, then comes back to find out that his mother has late-stage pancreatic cancer. They really just glide over what happens here, and I don't want to necessarily detail it, but Gavin and Debby disappear. Neither talk to his parents after finding out she has cancer. It's unclear how they found out, what is going on here. DeWitt doesn't do anything after finding out. Apparently, nobody contacts anyone. There's absolutely radio silence, and Gregg and his parents are alone, according to Gregg. This is the jarring shift in tone, by the way. At 1:18 one morning, Debby calls Gregg's house. He, assuming it's just part of the harassment, lets it go to voicemail, and she screams at him to pick up. When he picks up, she says his mom is in the hospital and she has minutes to live. He says she sounds like she's out of breath and holding back laughter at the same time. When he gets there, he says nothing to Gavin and Debby as he enters the room that holds their dying mother. As he holds her hand, Gavin starts talking shit to Gregg. You didn't hurt me. You didn't hurt me one bit. His dad is around the corner, talking and laughing with nurses as if nothing's wrong, as Gregg feels his mother's hand loosen in his, and she clinically dies. Gavin and Debby immediately leave. Gregg and his dad stay for a while, as they're asked what they want to do with the now clinically dead, but still technically alive, Maria Miller. At 3:35 a.m., his dad demands they leave, with his mother's heart still beating uselessly in her chest. He repeats this over and over until Gregg finally snaps at his dad and says, "Okay, Dad, let's get the fuck out of here." That is the end of chapter 1. Can you fucking believe this? Chapter 2 of this book begins with one of the most insane lines I've ever read in my life, especially in a book about the inventor of dog testicles. I discovered that a person can run out of tears. I wept, but there were no tears to weep. By 7 a.m. the day that his mother died, Gavin and Debby have gone over to Gregg's parents' house and taken all of his mum's medication from the medicine cabinet. Later that same day, Gregg gets a call telling him Gavin and Debby have sold the drugs to friends and neighbors. All of her fucking cancer medication pain pills are gone. The mom's funeral is completely fucking bizarre. Gregg emphasizes that Gavin and Debby are there with their children looking poor in oversized clothes. As he sobs at the coffin, Gregg overhears Debby telling Gavin that Gregg is being theatrical. Father Healy, who is the family's priest, had seen his mother through the years, but didn't know her, and referenced her life from notes that Gregg had provided. He rushed what should have been a 45-minute service to 22 minutes. When I say that a hunchback deacon enters, screams the Hail Mary without introducing himself, and then scurries away, it is literally, this guy's not Father Healy. He is apparently sent by Father Healy in kind of like, genuinely described in the book as looking like Igor. He scurries in, apparently screams the Hail Mary at the top of his fucking lungs and then just beelines out, not looking to the left or right. Greg's dad starts to unravel. Gregg pledges to him that he will never put him in a nursing home. For the next 7 weeks, he visits Gregg daily. DeWitt moves to have dad put in a home. He wants to have their dad declared legally incompetent. Dad has said to Gregg that he wants DeWitt to sell his house in exchange for a room with DeWitt in Florida. Gregg believes that this means that DeWitt is scheming. Gregg unloads on DeWitt. I quote from the book here. I reminded DeWitt of his past history, how he didn't manage to get his life in order until age 40, the decades of grief he created with his alcoholism and drug-related behavior, the abortion in the 80s, and the illegitimate child he produced and abandoned in the 60s, how he had ignored mom and dad for the previous decade, didn't even call mom during her illness, and wouldn't drive the 90 miles to be with her in her hour of death. We hard cut to Gregg asking Doc Holder to save him a spare dog testicle next time he neuters a dog. When Doc Holder, the vet, calls him up and says, I got that dog testicle you asked for, he takes the testicle to a laboratory where they test the testicle's sensitivity and pressure, and they use that information to invent the first ever silicone Neuticle. It's a Neuticle that addresses some of the complaints that people have had about the first run of Neuticles, which are, at the very least, similar to these. They are made out of a hard plastic. Apparently, the complaint was that pet owners could hear their dogs clacking as they walked. That's what you get if you buy the cheapest possible Neuticle to this very day. What comes next is the Neuticle Natural, a silicone implant that perfectly mimics the wonderful, beautiful form of a dog's testicle like we all know and love. A year passes, and Leo's dementia gets worse. Leo, of course, being Gregg's dad. He's living in filth at this point. He is giving his medication to his dog, which leads to the dog falling into a coma on more than one occasion. Gregg's dad is driving for hours and hours. He loves driving. However, unfortunately, he has severe Alzheimer's. He drives up to 400 miles a day, and he brags about going 100 miles per hour at times as he urinates freely in the truck. The truck is also constantly getting new dings and scratches on it, and at one point he rear-ends a car and then drives away. His dad also starts wandering around the neighborhood asking for food. He's, in no uncertain terms, losing his mind. Gregg finds him in his house at midnight, standing in a room alone with all the lights on, talking to his dead wife. Gregg goes outside to have a cigarette because he is understandably stressed out. When he goes to get back inside and tell his dad that he needs to be put in a home, or at least move in with Gregg, his dad has locked all the doors and gone to bed. We hard cut from this. Gregg is invited back on the Pat Bullard show. Gregg Miller, inventor of Neuticles, returns to the place where he got his first taste of TV glory. The reason he's back on the Pat Bullard show is the show has been cancelled during its first short season, and Gregg has been invited onto the final episode alongside Joan Rivers and TV host and American Vice President Walter Mondale's daughter, Eleanor Mondale, who he misremembers as non-existent author Muriel Mondale. She asks him for an autograph, apparently, for her husband. He says, I was the last guest on the last Pat Bullard show. We have here no Gregg talking, but you can see there in the background, Gregg Miller sat on the set of the final Pat Bullard show. He made that much of an impression to be brought back. He did. And he gifted Pat Bullard a Golden Neuticle Award. He gave him a necklace of Neuticles, which, to hear Gregg tell it, he wore to close out the show. Unfortunately, it looks like he took them off for the credits, as he is not wearing them here, as you can tell. I was the last guest on the last Pat Bullard show. This same year, the Neuticle wins the Ig Nobel Prize for Medicine. Congratulations to the Neuticle. He returns home to find out that Gavin and Debby have started building a room in his dad's basement. They are trying to move into his home as live-in carers and have him sign over control of his bank accounts and his house to them. Also missing are a color TV, a 35mm camera, tools, guns, $10,000 from his dad's bank account, and this is just a little bit of color in here. Gavin and Debby are being evicted from their house. The house also has only broken windows because Gavin broke all the windows in fits of rage. Just as a quick callback, this is the boy, the 25-year-old man, now 26, who Gregg was the undeclared mentor of. The Department of Aging is called on Gregg as his father wanders around the neighborhood asking neighbors for food. Ms. Jackson, described in the book as a heavy-set African-American woman, because Gregg has some stuff going on. Anytime someone could potentially be described as heavy or something adjacent to it. It's kind of a J.K. Rowling feel to it. Ms. Jackson tells Gregg that his father needs to be in a home. She is shocked that he has been driving. Gregg's dad moves in with him. Toots, his aunt, helps him move and helps block Gavin and Debby from getting access to the bank account and to the house. Aunt Toots is right, yeah. Toots is 70 years old, but apparently is as sharp as if she was in her 30s. Chapter 3. Gavin finds out that the dad has been stolen from the dad's house. A drunk Gavin drives over to Gregg's house with a friend and shoots the outside of the house with a 9mm rifle, screaming, "Get out here, you goddamned son of a bitch." He then drives away, circles around, and comes back. But in between that, Gregg has called the cops. The cops catch him as he returns to the scene of the crime. Days after Gavin gets arrested, Gavin and Debby return the favor by calling the cops on Gregg, saying that he's kidnapped his dad. The cops turn up and immediately hold Gregg at gunpoint until he explains what's going on. In both cases here, in Gavin's arrest, in this false kidnapping, the cops recognize Gregg as, that's Gregg Miller, the Neuticles guy. We move on to the next source of publicity. From Gavin, we move on to Jim Webb, a California man who wants to get a Neuticle to replace his big fucking nut that he lost. Gregg doesn't believe initially that Jim wants the Neuticle or that he wants the specific Neuticle that he asked for, because the Neuticles are not currently manufactured in Jim Webb's size. Jim Webb sends a photo of his massive nuts measuring 3¼ inches long to Gregg. Unfortunately, he can't get the implant because it's illegal in the US, and while Jim is offered the opportunity to travel to Germany or get a implant that is filled with saline, which is the prosthetic that is used in a human testicle prosthetic, he refuses because he doesn't want just any fake testicle. And I quote, "I wanted a Neuticle." Neighbors call the DOA again after Gregg's dad keeps leaving the house, going to door begging for food. In Gregg's words, the portly African-American lady arrives. Gregg says she reminds him of a human dog catcher. She sought out the elderly, with her only solution being to institutionalize them. She appeared angry and took pleasure in her, quote, work. This is, to be clear, a woman who is making sure that the severely Alzheimer's addled man does not have keys to drive his truck around. The man who has been hitting things with his truck is she is in the wrong somehow. She said dad was absolutely not to drive and was to remain on my property at all times. Honestly, shockingly lenient. However, according to law, dad had every right to drive or do whatever he pleased, as no court had declared him incompetent. Legally, I could not force him to do anything I wanted. Now, at this point, Leo doesn't know who the president is or what day of the week it is. He is pissing constantly in his truck, and he has killed his own dog, Mindy, through neglect. Gregg says, there were no options. I was going to have dad declared legally insane. Not because I wanted to, but because dad had forced me to do it with his stubborn behavior. They drive into town. Gregg takes him to the courthouse. The judge asks him multiple times, what day of the week is it and who's the president? He gives a different answer every time. No one answer of them is right. His dad moves in with Gregg as Gregg is declared the caregiver to his dad. The dad needs to be monitored 24/7. Gregg is to be a caregiver while balancing his life around his demanding business of manufacturing fake dog nuts. This is the start of a completely baffling period in his life. Now, at this point, another interesting thing happens. Gregg lands an interview on the Howard Stern show. This interview happens on the 31st of May, 2001. The interview includes just basically Howard Stern asking him why he invented these. It's very similar to the Mancow interview in that Stern also asks him, did you fuck the dog? Do you fuck the dog? Would you like to fuck the dog? Have you ever thought of fucking the dog? I'm now going to play a little bit of it.
The guy's name is Gregg Miller, and Gregg is the creator of something called Neuticles. Gregg decided a couple years ago that when he saw a dog that was neutered, that he would make testicle implants for dogs so that they would have testicles.
Oh, my goodness.
Is that right?
It was 7 years ago,
right.
And it was my own dog, my beloved bloodhound named Buck.
He's in press mode here. Now, I'm just going to skip forward to the point that I want to play on stream. There we go.
Seriously, have you ever, I swear I'm not trying to be funny, have you ever had sex with your dog?
No, never.
Do you ever look at your dog longingly or something?
Well,
absolutely fucking goated delivery. Fucking sick. fucking rules to Priest. That's why he's the best. Why do they all think he wants to fuck the dog? Well, they're trying to make something listenable, you know? You ever look at your dog longingly? This interview happens, spoiler alert, but Buck the dog passes away. Howard and Robin do ask him if he shakes the urn, does he hear the fake dog nuts clacking around in there? Pretty good. The next Neuticles publicity attempt is with longtime Neuticles helper Randy Miller, a radio host from Missouri. When it comes out that Bill Clinton is reticent to neuter his dog Buddy, Randy and Gregg campaign for Buddy to be neuticled. They send Neuticles and a grab bag of merch to the White House. Unfortunately, let me just read this to you. For one thing, he receives a personally signed thank you card from President Clinton. There was a media frenzy around the clock with interviews from radio stations and newspapers all over the country and world. A publicity event could not get any bigger or better than this. They wait 8 days to find out if Buddy would get neuticled. On the 8th day of wait, the Monica Lewinsky story broke, and all eyes turned to that event, which dominated the news for months to come. It was never known if, in fact, Buddy was neutered with Neuticles. And if not, and this is a baffling sentence, keep this in your head, and if not, whether the nature of the product and the matter in which President Clinton had become involved in with the affair had any influence due to the publicity it would create. That is a very peep this out sentence. The matter in which President Clinton had become involved in with the affair. Interesting stuff. Now, just to give you a quick reference, we do know about the Clintons' dog. This is from For the Dog Who Doesn't Have Everything by Douglas Martin for the New York Times, reprinted here in the National Post Toronto. He contacted Barry Toive, a White House spokesman, and immediately got an answer back. There are no Neuticles in Buddy the dog. That is the end of Chapter 3. We enter Chapter 4. Chapter 4 starts us in 1998. We jumped forward to 2001 there. It's a cold December in Missouri. Gregg finds his dad pouring water into a truck instead of oil. He doesn't have the keys, but he still wants to attend to it. He wrestles with him, getting his dad in a headlock. At 2:15 a.m., some days later, he wakes up for no reason. He checks the door, finds it's unlocked. He locks the door, but can't get back to sleep. 15 minutes later, he hears a car with a bad muffler driving slowly before the engine cuts out 100 feet away. Minutes later, the front doorknob rattles, and Buck, the bloodhound, darts up and scares away who was ever there with barking, as Gregg stands in the darkness, holding a baseball bat. The next morning, Gregg finds a beer bottle and a crumpled cigarette wrapper on the porch and remembers Gavin's promise to get me on a dark, cold winter night. This intro also includes this line. My life was broken in so many areas that it appeared impossible to overcome and correct them all. Each morning, I awoke to the smell of Dad's urine. I learned a lot about urine. He tries to take a ball of foil from his dad. His dad punches him in return, just cold cocks him from the side of the head. And then they wrestle. He pushes his dad away with all his might, and his dad falls, hitting his head on a chair, leaving him with a bruise and egg-sized bump on the head. They have had, I think, 2 to 3 physical confrontations. Later on, he has started booking in his dad to an adult daycare, to a dementia daycare. He gets a call from the daycare from a worker called Brian. Brian says that Bain, the daycare director, spelt B-A-I-N, was going to report him because dad had a goose egg-sized bump on his head and his face was bruised. They thought I had beat him up. Now, bearing in mind, this comes after he did, I would say, assault his dad. Gregg starts to feel the daycare turn against him with the introduction of Bain. Bain, he describes as a portly African-American man from the inner city where he ran a homeless shelter for single men. We never liked each other from the first day. Now, Bain is also maybe a little biased immediately against Gregg's dad, because Gregg's dad calls Bain that mean N-word to his face. Gregg does not censor the word in the book. Bain acted as if it didn't bother him, but I knew it cut him to the quick. Brian, the daycare employee that Gregg likes, tells Gregg that he's a marked man and that the daycare staff has labeled him abusive. This is from Gregg. Quote, I learned that adult daycare employees are a certain breed of people. They are content sitting all day long watching and entertaining the disabled, making minimum wage. To them, the client is an endangered species, and play act as is they are obsessed in treating them as such. It wasn't because they necessarily cared about the person, it was because of the legal liability if something happened to that person under their care. Now, just not interested in what happens to people under his care, and not really a criticism of the people. They should be paid a hero's wage. He clearly tries to get other criticisms of Bane going. He says that Bane drove onto his yard, tearing up his lawn. The place in question is 10 acres large and it maybe doesn't have a driveway. Tammy, a neighbor, says that she saw Bane driving fast. She says, quote from the book, with a fat black man driving very fast and swerving in and out of heavy traffic. Now, let's do a quick check-in with the rest of the family. Gavin has become so fat he couldn't climb a ladder to trim a tree. This is just in keeping with Gregg's branding of people who are evil as fat and who are fat as evil. DeWitt hadn't talked about Dad in months, but he did send Gregg a Christmas present for Dad every year. He always sent to his dad a sweater, care of Gregg. He did not send Gregg anything. When DeWitt does call Gregg, it's to boast of his career, for example, of just buying a $60,000 Porsche or taking a $15K Disney World vacation or maybe buying a new home. And Gregg's dad often wonders where Gregg is to his face, and he calls Gregg that man. Gregg grows to hate him. One day, the daycare employee Brian, who Gregg likes, turns up to pick Dad up with his 18-month-old daughter in the back of a brand new rented Buick. On the way to the daycare, Brian makes a stop at his grandma's to pick something up, and Gregg's dad moves the gear shift into neutral on a slope, and the car rolls backward for 3 blocks before slamming into a truck at an intersection. His 18-month-old is taken to hospital. This is parking America style. Absolutely no use for the handbrake in the American car, in the American brain. Also, shouldn't have left your infant daughter in the car with the Alzheimer's adult man. In with this, Gregg drops the anecdote that a doctor from Indianapolis buys a large set of Neuticles for a dog, then calls to complain that they are not the right size, that his dog's nuts are dragging on the carpet because his dog is actually very small, but he wanted his dog to have big nuts. Despite a 100% success rate, quoting from the book here, and years of publicity worth countless millions of dollars, Neuticles had not caught on anywhere near anticipated projections. This is where you get to the point of true heartbreak, realizing that Gregg Miller's goals were to make neutering with Neuticles as commonplace as neutering without. Wanted it to just be a default thing that you would get your dog some prosthetic nuts to put in there, because you as an owner desperately need your dog to have nuts. He provides the county, finally, with notice that he is going to commit his father to a home so that he can receive the money that they had been taking care of for him from the sales of his dad's truck and house. On page 110, Gregg's dad beats him over the head with a wooden plaque, and Gregg pushes his dad so hard that his dad leaves a perfect outline of his body in the plasterboard. A week out from his dad going into a care home, the county takes away Gregg's guardianship of his father for alleged elder abuse, corroborated by the daycare employees Brian and Bane. Gregg says this, Bane and Brian, these are the daycare employees, 2 minimum wage, public high school educated outsiders had managed to place Dad into an uncertain and terrifying point of no return. No, the Alzheimer's did that. Also, the vitriol, the pure venom that he puts into 2 minimum wage, public high school educated outsiders. You know he's swallowing so many words there. With a few spoken words, they had discredited and bastardized my reputation, years of sacrifices, losses, and efforts to keep Dad away from what was happening to him now. Chapter 4 ends on this sentence. How proud the infidels must feel, and may they be damned for it. He's talking like Sephiroth. He's for real talking like Sephiroth. He's talking like a fucking black-white magic card, dude. It's insane. A week had passed since Dad was snatched, begins chapter 5. Gregg is forced to resign the guardianship of his father, because if he doesn't, the county will just sue and make him resign it, and he doesn't have the funds or the energy to take the case. Of course, he can't take it. He doesn't have the funds because he's been distracted by his father, who he has had to care for and beat up 24 hours a day. His lawyer also advises him not to take legal action because the lawyer has to work with these people every day. That's interesting. to hear as a prospective client. He cedes guardianship of his father. On Gregg's birthday, his beloved dog Buck, the inspiration for Neuticles, passes away. The Examiner, Independence, Missouri's paper, runs a front-page story commemorating Buck, which is publicity. And Gregg loves publicity. Gregg prints the entire story in his book, and he frames the paper to hang in his home. It is genuinely front-page news. Gregg finds solace in how many people read the story when it's picked up by the Associated Press and flash news distributors. He says this: millions of people learned of Buck's death, and sharing the news with people helped fill a hole that had been left in my heart and my life forever. Now, I do want to say also in this video, you also see this, a sculpture of a face smoking a cigar. I just had like a wild guess here, and I was right, because if you Google cigar sculpture, it immediately comes up. It is available everywhere you could possibly think of buying a sculpture. It is available on Amazon. Gregg decides to sell his house. His 10 acres has been ruined by the memories of his father, and also by his father, who had, without him knowing, emptied bags and bags and bags of trash into the wildflowers that once grew there. In selling his house, he meets Toby Evans, who lives nearby, who has some friends who would like to look at the house. Now, I want to talk to you about Toby Evans. Certified soul detective, keeper of the prairie labyrinth. All of her titles could be put on a blood-borne boss health bar. Toby Evans encounters Gregg when he is looking to sell his house. Toby Evans is a believer of past lives. Across several podcasts and some press releases, she lists her past lives. In all of the past lives that I've found her recounting, she is indigenous. In one past life, she was a Native American man whose family was being massacred by another group of Native Americans, led by the soul that would become her husband. In another past life, she was a Native American girl whose family was being massacred by Union soldiers. The Union soldiers were commanded by a soldier who was the soul that would become her husband. And the soul that in this life is her son was one of the other soldiers. She could sense this. In all of her past lives, she is an indigenous person who dies terribly. She is the final boss of Babe, I Just Had the Craziest Dream. She says, I always had an infinity, her era, to Native Americans, preferring to be the Indian instead of the cowboy. And for my 5th birthday, I received a full headdress and outfit that I often wore. You can't be talking like that, white baby. Growing up Catholic didn't allow for the possibility of other lifetimes, so I kept rejecting the past life notion, yet many things kept pointing me in this direction. In her book, Soul Bridge to Original Light, Toby Evans lays out the mission of the Soul Bridge, which, to quote the blurb, is to assist the crossing over of the massive number of souls from the 4 races, parentheses, red, black, white, and yellow, close parentheses, who died throughout American history and remained here. She tells Gregg, in meeting him, that she feels a negative energy from him, from the inventor of the fake dog testicles. She suggests that she smudge the house for Gregg by burning sage. Gregg sits in a chair and puts his feet on an ottoman as Toby burns the sage and waves the smoke down towards him with a feather. The next morning, Gregg wakes up with no anxiety for the first time in years. Toby tells Gregg that his mother did not go to heaven, instead staying tethered to Gregg and the house to keep watch over him and his dad. The auric imprint left on Gregg's auric field was from her. And to relieve him of that auric imprint, they need to cut the cord that is keeping her on this world. I'm just going to quote from the book here. Toby said my mother was angry with me the morning she died at the hospital. She was angry with me for yelling at Dad, who was insisting I take him home that moment, leaving her to die alone. She said she wanted me and Dad to leave so she could, in fact, die alone. Toby said it appalled my mother that I said, "Okay, Dad, let's get the fuck out of here." No one, but no one on this earth knew of that night's incident or that remark, except those in the ICU unit of the hospital that horrible early morning 5 years prior. I am now going to backtrack for a reveal. I have been keeping something from you. Is that scattered throughout the book, completely unhinged and unmoored from any other part of the Neuticles story or from the story of him being given death threats by his little brother, are what I've come to term Gregg's miracles. Gregg's miracles are as follows. When Gregg brings Buck the Bloodhound home for the first time, he notices a ray of sunlight entering through the front door window. Bright sunlight casts a spotlight beam, perfectly framing an 8x10 photo of Hank, his first dog, which was on a bookcase shelf across the room. While I had lived there for 4 years, and the picture of Hank had been in the same spot for almost that long, the ray of light seen that late afternoon had never been seen before and was never seen again. Gregg, throughout the book, has had encounters with the unexplained. Page 43. I was getting a shirt from the dresser drawer in the southwest corner of my bedroom when I heard an odd noise above me in the attic. It was just in that one corner, within a certain small area. It was a muffled noise that almost sounded like a single voice. When I stepped back a foot or so, it couldn't be heard, but when I stepped forward, back into that small area, the noise returned. What could it be? I asked myself as I went back outside to see if the wind was blowing to create the sound. There was no breeze. I went back to the bedroom and stood in the same spot, and the noise was gone and the incident forgotten. Later on in page 76, he says, the muffled noises in the southwest corner of my bedroom had returned after all these months. I had hoped that the unexplainable muffled sounds I had first heard weeks after my mother was buried were my imagination, but they weren't. The noises were real. And now there were 5 or 6 different tones that could best be described as voices. Like a conversation, one muffled voice could be heard for a few seconds, then another would start, then stop. Sometimes 3 or 4 voices could be heard at once. Overtalk. Pretty bad etiquette. Once I told Toots on the phone while Dad was listening that I heard strange muffled tones and couldn't figure out what they were. Dad replied, "That's something you don't talk about." And now we come to Gregg's longest written out miracle. I was finishing a round of Earth2025.com when an empty Coke can, that's a turn-based online game, when an empty Coke can, which was sitting 2 feet away on my desk, gently began to edge forward to where my arm rested. It was as if it was being pushed. It would move, then stop, then move again. I couldn't believe my eyes. While I had the same desk for over 20 years and had drank thousands of Cokes, putting the can in or about the same place, a can had never slid forward before. I felt the can and it was bone dry on the outside with only a few drops remaining inside. The desktop was also dry. Being a smoker, ashes covered the can's path. Even cake crumbs were brushed away as I wiped the surface with my hand, which discounted the idea of the can hydroplaning. The can was placed back where it had been before, and I again began to surf the internet. Within several minuets, his error, the can edged gently forward again, exactly as it had only moments before, moving an inch or so, then stopping, then moving several more inches until it reached and gently touched my arm. I ignored it. I blocked what had happened from my mind. I knew something beyond my comprehension had just occurred, but I ignored it like it had never happened, because there was no conceivable explanation. That concludes the list of Gregg's miracles. But Gregg has been in contact with the other side without him knowing it throughout the book. The muffled voices and music were 7 other earthbound spirits who'd been brought into the house by his mother's presence. On page 129, Gregg takes Toby's journal and prints that in the book, as she has offered to assist him in a ceremony that will help his mother leave this plane. Toby Evans records seeing a center of white light opening up over her labyrinth. To recap, when I say over her labyrinth, people might not know what I mean. This is a labyrinth. This is like a a thing that you walk. It's a form of kind of physical prayer or meditation or tribute. So you walk along this track, and as you do, you think about whatever you're doing. It's used in a lot of spiritual practices. That is what she has provided Gregg with the ability to do. She keeps labyrinths on her land. Toby Evans sees a center of white light open up over the statue of the Virgin Mary placed in the center of her labyrinth. She sees spirit helpers ready to guide Marion home. On Soul Bridge, Toby Evans' docu-podcast, Evans goes into how we are all one, talking about how humankind divides itself over racial lines due to trauma, and it enslaves itself by doing so. Terrazelle Inc., the company that produces her docu-podcast and publicizes it, keeps the slideshow running over her words. As she says this, the docu-podcast slideshow shows Justin Trudeau walking flanked by rainbow flags, a trans child smiling with her schoolmates, and Joe Biden with his hand on Volodymyr Zelensky's back. I want to talk now about the Stone Register, the company that does this podcast. The Stone Register is a self-proclaimed boutique advertising company in New York City, and in my opinion, they fucking suck. The Stone Register says that depending on scheduling, availability, and general approval, they pride themselves on taking clients along with us on our journey to the top. If we feel you'll benefit by being part of our Thomson Reuters TSR campaigns, then that is precisely where you'll end up. 11 billboards simultaneously playing our still images or moving advertisements. This is an example of what this place fucking does. It is maybe the stupidest business I've ever seen in my life. They publicize that they are members of the Forbes Business Council, that they are pleased to announce their official selection by Forbes to be included in their esteemed business council for a fourth consecutive year from 2020 to 2023. Now, that means that they have paid their subscription fee to be in the Forbes Business Council. The Forbes Business Council and the Forbes councils as a whole are a fucking scam. Not a scam, because they do give you what they promise, which is the ability to pitch articles to Forbes that they will then not provide with any SEO, and they will only publicize on their Forbes Council online profiles, not the main one. You are paying a subscription to be sold things constantly, and this guy is wearing it like a badge of honor. It is some seriously MBA brain shit. Here's what the Stone Register does for people who sign up for their services. They get your advertising material on a bunch of billboards in Times Square for, at a guess, 45 seconds. And you can see here that this Times Square advertisement for the new podcast by a preacher has not completely taken off. Obviously, this is predicated on people who are in Times Square looking up.
Today we are speaking with Dr. Deborah Ford.
That is the person who runs this company. They sell a package that basically says, we will help you produce a docu-podcast. We are going to give you advertising across New York City, aka this area of Times Square. And the podcast, we will make a video component for it as well. What that means is that they are going to make you the world's worst content. I want to bring up here their YouTube channel, where they upload all of their shit. Check this shit out. Here's their YouTube channel. This is the only place that this stuff gets uploaded and then gets absolutely zero views. Soul Bridge with Toby Evans is some successful. They also upload the draft edits. They seem to work almost exclusively in Christian or cop or other, kind of conservative leaning areas. They basically just upload videos of their billboards and their dog shit podcasts that no one would ever watch, except for me, because I needed to find out more about Toby Evans. I also want to just take a second to highlight the fact that the owner of this business appears to have bought somebody a cameo from Randy Rainbow.
Barbara, I just rolled out of bed. Actually, I'm in the middle of doing a video. That is why the ensemble, I don't want you to think I didn't get dressed for you. But anyway, I'm just checking in to say congratulations on your brand new online series. And you're pretty fancy. I mean, I understand you just came to New York and saw yourself on the NASDAQ tower in Times Square. That's fancy stuff, Barbara.
Let me show you this. This is what they call a trailer. Truly terrifies me to think of the amount that was charged for this. This is just a short divergent from the main subject here, which is, of course, Neuticles. to say that this is bizarre to me. It is bizarre to be talking about a man who is all about the sale at the cost of everything else, and then to find that the one spiritual link in his life also has something of that in her. Here we have an ad
for an interactive and modern approach to tutoring.
If you just keep the art design of this here in your mind, this seems to me reason to think that Neuticles has also used this particular company.
When you neuter with Neuticles, it's like nothing ever changed.
If you recognize that sound, it's because I've been using it for each chapter here. The reason I've been using it for each chapter is because I think it should be used somewhere. It is the Neuticles jingle. It was announced on the Neuticles official site as being used on their new site whenever you would load it up. Unfortunately, it does not currently work, and so I had to do view page source, get into the CSS, and download it manually. Gregg Miller walks the labyrinth. At the center of this labyrinth, in front of a statue of the Virgin Mary, Toby Evans sings Love's Home, the song Gregg's mother's spirit picked out for her to sing to him the night before. Toby senses Marion turning to her before disappearing, saying that she thanked her for the ceremony and asked Gregg to tell Bud that she had gone on. Also of note, this extract where Gregg simply publishes Toby's diary entry of the ritual that she performs for Gregg is the only reason we know Gregg's mum's name. Everywhere else she is just referred to as Mom. Here, she is given a first name. Gregg decides to sell his house. The land I had once held so dear was left behind without looking back. It was as if a devastating storm had passed which had taken everything with it. There was nothing more to be taken or to be lost. He sells his house to a couple who recognize him. The man turns to his wife and says, "This is Gregg Miller. He's famous." This, by the way, is the actual labyrinth that is on Toby Evans's land. You can check it out by her Sagebrush website that is still up. One of the websites is still up. The other one that is listed on the press releases has been taken over by squatters and now features flashing porn gifs. The Jackson County, Missouri Conservator's Office squanders the money from Leo Jackson's account, according to Gregg. On March 14th, Gregg gets a call from his dad's guardian that his father is dying. He goes to see him in a care home, finds him completely unrecognizable, bald, toothless, and looking frankly skeletal. He tells him then that his mom had moved on to the other side. Dad's eyes opened completely, and he smiled as he tried to say something, but I couldn't begin to understand his faint attempts, which changed to a humming sound, as if he was trying to sing. That is the end of the book. So he hasn't visited him since putting him in the home. That is the end. Those are the final words in the book. That's it. That's how we see out the grand story of the fake dog testicles. I do have some post-book news, because this book was published in 2005. In 2005, he found out what Wikipedia was, and he made a Wikipedia page for Neuticles. He says there that Neuticles was awarded the Ig Nobel Prize, except he doesn't. What he says is, Neuticles was awarded the capital I, capital G, Nobel Prize for Medicine by Harvard University. He also claims he was the first 18-year-old to run for office in the United States. Later amended to he was the first 18-year-old to run for office in Independence, Missouri. And he states that he came second, when in fact, from the Kansas City Times on the 5th of April, 1972, he came third. Hang on, was Going Nuts referring to his dad? Yes, Going Nuts. The title of this book and the cracked nuts on the cover is a dual reference to the fake testicles, but also to his dad's descent into and death from Alzheimer's disease. He states during caring for his father that he refers to the act of making sure that his dad can't get into a car or access things that could hurt him. He refers to that in his own head as crazy-proofing, and to stop himself from hating his dad, he starts referring to his dad in his own head as Wacky Pappy. In 2006, Gregg makes an account on Wikipedia after editing from only an IP account. The Neuticles account, which is Gregg, changes the Neuticles Wikipedia accounts to the text of a previously released press release. After this, an anonymous user adds an image to the page of what is purported to be a human scrotum, post-castration and Neuticle replacement. The person in question was anonymous, only identifiable by IP, but they are likely the user Richie X, who has been banned from Wikipedia multiple times for repeatedly adding a picture of their own nuts to any page they could get it onto. The image has been removed from the page at this point. At the point where I found this, it was at that point being used as the image for the Wikipedia page of testicles on Finnish Wikipedia, and it was the photo for scrotum on Belarusian Wikipedia. It has since been removed as the picture of testicles on Finnish Wikipedia, and if you want to see the photo, which again was erroneously claimed to be filled with Neuticles, you can head over to Belarusian Wikipedia to look at the article for scrotum. On the 5th of September 2010, a single line is added to and deleted from Gregg Miller's Wikipedia page over the course of 3 minutes. The line is, Miller's childhood was quite tumultuous. The editor is anonymous. The line is dropped into the article, which would then be deleted off of Wikipedia several years later for failing to meet relevancy standards, and then deleted by the same user after sitting on Wikipedia for 3 minutes. In 2017, an F3 tornado strikes what Gregg Miller refers to as Neuticle land, as proved here on Facebook, and goes between Gregg's house and his neighbor's house, touching down 50 feet away, vaporizing everything in its path. The tornado in question killed 14 cows and injured 44 people. You can see him here on the Facebook page for Neuticles, once again trying to get away with Ig Nobel, a 2005 winner of the LG Nobel Peace Prize for Medicine. Not what it's called. He knows it's not what it's called. We all know it's not what it's called. Neuticles are highlighted in exhibition at the Tokyo Dome in Japan. Damn, 6 stars. An anime rendering of Gregg Miller explains that the Neuticles are an artificial replacement testicle for dogs. In 2018, Gregg Miller is interviewed by CNBC reporters for the program Strange Success.
When I'm driving my brand new car and I pass the billboard, I get this rush that is indescribable. I mean, it's a feeling of wow.
Gregg Miller is living the dream.
That, to me, sums up Gregg Miller. He loves fame. He loves publicity. He wants to be an ads man. He wants to be beloved, to be known. He doesn't really care how it happens, as far as I can tell. He needs people to know that he's right. He needs people to know that he is being wronged, and he loves attention almost as much, if not more so, than he loves money. Tom, have you seen this email he sent to Slobes after the order? Let me check this. This is a message to Slobes, who purchased this wonderful grab bag of merch that I have on me today. All of the items fit very nicely in a reasonably small box that can be used to forward on to Australia. Each item is individually packed, a treasure trove of Neuticle wear. Other than a 500-piece keyring order to the TV show To Tell the Truth years ago, this was the largest Neuticle wear order in our 28-year history. That explains why he was so panicked when he received the order that he immediately cancelled it. I also want to highlight this from the CNBC program Strange Success that interviewed Miller.
His father has since passed away, and somewhere along the line, Buck the Bloodhound also crossed the Rainbow Bridge to the other side.
He died a hideous death, by the way.
Sorry, I didn't ask how. I just didn't really want to know.
Really good. It's really fantastic. Gregg, the kind of guy to just volunteer that stuff. Neuticles continues from strength to strength today. It is featured on The Kardashians. It is featured on pretty much any TV show that ends up needing to put many, many, many hours of content out. Because it is something to talk about that makes people talk. That's what brought me to it. He makes his way to places that need things to talk about. He makes his way to reality TV, to daytime talk shows, to anywhere that is the perfect place for someone who just can talk. And he is a talent at talking, right? He is incredible talent at talking. The overwhelming feeling I had from this book. Oh, just realized it's what the fuck am I doing with my life? But before that, before I got deep enough into this guy's life that I read every single fucking article he wrote in his 3 years that he worked at the Tipton Times or whatever, before I understood where the 3rd District in Independence, Missouri is, the feeling that I had was that it is so interesting to have someone tell you who they are. Both in ways that they're aware of, where he says that being famous, he essentially does the fucking Arnie talking about getting a pump speech, but about seeing his face on a billboard or hearing himself on the radio. Also, in the way that he lays out every one of his interactions with people around him as never including a fault for himself. So I guess I'd say it's a 7 out of 10. A light 7. Some interesting parts. I liked when there were dogs. I have one really good video that I want to show you. I forgot about it because it's on Facebook. You're going to lose your fucking minds. So this is an example of someone who has had Neuticles installed in their dog. Get ready to see the most insane ball layout on this Weimaraner.
Neutering her dog made Shauna
Beautiful
feel bad.
Weimaraner.
She didn't want him to live a life without testicles, so she got him fake.
You hit it with the right bumper. You spun that shit 90 degrees. It's so bad.
Big dog and their
inline testicles for aerodynamics. Yeah, they're drafting behind the penis.